It is 7 o'clock. This is Sky News Breakfast, and these are our top stories. The mothers grieving their sons murdered by Russian forces. We'll bring you the story of Peace Street near Bucha.
And I'm in Ukraine, where the fighting continues, and President Zelenskyy says he has lost up to 3,000 troops in the conflict so far.
Not fit for purpose. Concerns over the visa process for Ukrainian families waiting to come to the UK. Also ahead, the Home Secretary's formal instruction to press ahead with plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, despite objections from her top civil servant. Calls for routine screening for a common infection which can prove fatal in newborn babies. In the sport, Liverpool and Manchester City meet for the second time in 6 days this afternoon as the FA Cup reaches the semi-finals. As for the weather, a fine day in store with warm sunny spells for many once the overnight fog lifts, the rain spreading into Western Ireland later. And at 2:45, we'll take another look at the papers with the former editor of the Daily Star, Dawn Neesom, and the writer and academic Mo Lovatt. Morning all. Ukraine is bracing for renewed assaults after Moscow threatened to step up missile attacks on the Ukrainian capital after the sinking of the Moskva, Russia's flagship in the Black Sea. Well, last night, a senior US defence official said the ship had been hit by at least one Ukrainian missile. Let's take a look at the latest developments. Police in Ukraine say the bodies of more than 900 civilians have been found in the area around the capital after Russian forces withdrew from the region. Ukrainian authorities say Russian shelling hit a residential area of Kharkiv on Friday, killing at least 10 people, including a 7-month-old baby, and injuring 35 others. In his nightly address to the country, President Zelenskyy has said as many as 3,000 Ukrainian troops have died during the war so far. And the mother of a British man captured by Russian forces whilst serving in the Ukrainian army has told Sky News he should be treated as a legitimate prisoner of war. Jason, good to see you. Hopefully your connection's working OK. Just bring us up to date with the latest. President Zelenskyy claiming that perhaps as many as 3,000 Ukrainian troops have been lost. I mean, the key phrase in that statement, so far.
Yeah, that's right. He says between 2,500 and 3,000 Ukrainian troops have been lost. And that obviously compared to the number of civilians that the mayor of Mariupol said so far he believes being killed just in that city at a figure of 21,000. And as you said in your introduction, they've found 900 civilian bodies now in and around Kiev. So it is predominantly civilians who are the casualties of this war. And that is why there were celebrations really here or certainly a feeling of celebration here in Odessa when the Moskva was sunk out in the sea, which had been patrolling off the shores of this city because it was seen as a great threat, sending missiles into this area and others. And people feel that that really is something to celebrate. One person said to me, you know, this isn't the sort of thing we would actually be very happy about, people dying at sea, but Russia is killing our civilians, killing our children. It's not clear yet what impact that is going to have on the Russian military. It's clearly a big dent to their prestige. It is a catastrophic naval incident for them, but they still have other warships. They're still able to blockade this city, and they've proven that they can still fire missiles in and cause damage and kill people. We heard of those 10 people dying in Kharkiv. There were another 5 people died up the road in Mykolaiv here, where that ship was actually built back in the Soviet era, when some shelling came into the civilian area there, injuring lots of people as well. And perhaps the most immediate direct response to what happened from Russia was the bombing of a factory just outside of Kiev, which actually built these kind of missiles, built air missiles and naval missiles. That factory was bombed, almost directly after the sinking of the ship. So that seems like an immediate response, but I'm sure we will see more. And I think, this city and others are still bracing themselves for this big push. And again, asking the West what more they can do to help support them. And interestingly, there was a diplomatic message from Moscow to the US on Tuesday, which has only just been revealed today in the Washington Post and the New York Times, saying to the West that there would be unpredictable consequences if they did continue to supply weapons to Ukraine. I mean, it's a kind of phrase we've heard before from Moscow, but it was interesting because it came just before President Biden approved another £800 million package to Ukraine in military support, including for the first time long-range missiles, and it brings to a total from the US in terms of financial support of military aid to £3 billion. So I think Russia feeling that this is becoming a bit of a proxy war between Russia and the West, and trying to threaten the West to say, look, you've got to stop supplying arms here. But if they do, it's difficult to know how the Ukrainians would be able to defend themselves. That said, the Neptune missile that allegedly sunk this boat was developed here in Ukraine.
Jason, many thanks indeed. Just a little bit of breaking news, in fact, reaching us from Ukraine's capital, Kiev. Around about 4 o'clock our time this morning, there were reports on the news wires of explosions being heard in and around Kiev. The mayor of Kiev, of course, Vitaly Klitschko, the former professional boxer, has said that rescuers and medics are now working on the site of that explosion in what he describes as Kiev's outskirts. We'll try and monitor events there and see if we can bring you just a little bit more detail on what might have happened. But certainly it feels like there may well have been some sort of a cruise missile attack or perhaps an attack from the air. We'll monitor and return to that. But let's also return to that report from our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes. She has travelled to a street in Kiev known as Peace Street and has been speaking to two mothers of two sons killed and tortured by the Russians before her report. Just a warning, it does contain distressing accounts of torture.
When Russia's war hit this small village outside Kiev, it took the heart out of a single road, Peace Street. Two young men grew up together here a few houses apart. Viktor Ballet in the yellow T-shirt, Pavel Kolodenko in the white. Now, two shattered families are all that's left. They say Russian soldiers captured, tortured and shot the childhood friends. Their broken bodies found buried together in a shallow grave. The local priest, the only comfort.
Пішов, і ми його не бачили. Однесенький, як пальчик, без батька рос. І нема мого внучика, нема. Та якби так уже... Подивіться на це дитя. А вони його закатували, розумієте, закатували. Живого місця нема на ньому. За що? За що? В чому воно винне? Воно ж ні в чому не винувате. Ви подивіться на це дитя. Йому ще та жить да жить. Нема мого синочка більше. Нема мого хлопчика. Нема мого дитинки. Нема моєї дитинки.
She clung to the memory of her only child. Viktor and Pavel both used to serve in the military. It's probably why they were murdered. She last spoke to her son in late February when Russian tanks rolled into the village. The two friends had been planning to volunteer to fight again.
Його були останні слова. Мамочка, я тебе люблю, но мені треба йти. Мені треба йти захищати свою Україну. Він каже, мамочка, я тебе люблю.
As we spoke, Pavel's mother appeared. She showed us their house and her raw pain.
Мені навіть не важко сказати, але я скажу. Навіть в рот їх застрелили з автомата. З головочки тут у капюшону все повилітало в їх. Це дуже тяжко, дуже тяжко.
And do you believe that your son and his friend were captured and tortured and killed together?
Да, разом. Вони разом були однакові, однаково, що в того тільки у Павліка права вся сторона була поломана, і пальчики, ручки, а у Віті ліва сторона. Дружили разом і загибли разом, і закатували разом, і в одній ямі їх закопали.
Photographs of Pavel remembered fondly. He and Viktor were only 28 years old. No one knows what day they died. Their remains only found after Russian forces withdrew. The priest helped give them a proper burial. He showed us Pavel's final resting place, a permanent reminder of what Russia's war did to the two young friends from Peace Street. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Zedvijivka, outside Kiev.
Well, let's get the latest assessment now from the former head of policy planning at NATO, Fabrice Potier. Fabrice, good to see you again. Hope you're well. Wonder if we might start with that which we've just been hearing in the past few hours from President Zelenskyy. Speaking to CNN in an interview with that particular channel, he suggests that we need to be mindful of the fact that Vladimir Putin has nuclear weapons and that he might use them. Is that a little bit of posturing by the Ukrainian president, or is this the reality that we all must now deal with?
Well, I think from the beginning, Putin was kind of clear that nuclear weapons were pretty big in the background of his war campaign. So I think what the Ukrainian president just said is nothing fundamentally new, but obviously very serious and of high concern, but should not freeze the efforts by the West to actually help the Ukrainians prevail on the battleground. So I think we should not fall into the Vladimir Putin nuclear blackmail, and instead should stand firm, send to Putin some clear message that WMDs have no place in this conflict, and keep on supporting the Ukrainians.
What then of the situation in the Black Sea, the flagship being lost there? There is a bit of debate between the Ukrainian position that they shot it and it went down, and the Russians who claim that a fire broke out. But either way, it's a significant loss.
This is very significant, very symbolic. And you have to keep in mind that in 3 weeks, Putin wants to have his big parade on the 9th of May on the Red Square. And I think he will have to show some symbolic and some real victories. And this is why probably now we are seeing an escalation of the Russian forces and also of the Russian threats, because he will have to show more than what you're just showing on your screen, which is one of the most symbolic battleships of the Russian Navy that got sunk, most probably by Ukrainian forces.
What does this then mean for this pending assault that we're all predicting will happen in the east of the country?
It means a terrible war of destruction, of annihilation of entire cities and possibly population areas, like we've seen in Mariupol. So you may have Mariupol reproduced on different fronts on the eastern Donbass. And the real question here is, can we provide Zelenskyy and his forces enough heavy equipment, especially artillery and counter-artillery systems, to be able to resist the onslaught? That's the real question.
Well, what do you make of the chances of that? I mean, we had that NATO meeting a little bit earlier, a few days ago now, in which they agreed to start providing the heavier armaments, the heavier weaponry. So there is definitely the desire to help in that capacity. But even with that, just the numbers that the Russians have massed on the borders, the numbers that they can mobilise quite quickly, it will be a bloody battle at the very least.
It will be. And then look at Mariupol. The Ukrainians are still resisting inside Mariupol, and yet the Russians are willing to entirely destroy the city. And with the strategy, probably, that if they will win on the field of ruins, and then they will maybe repopulate Mariupol with their own kind of Russian population. And it's deeply disturbing, because this is the kind of thing you saw during the Second World War, especially in Ukraine. But I think you can predict this kind of strategy. And the only way, again, is to contain as much as possible the Russian onslaught, and to keep on basically protecting major population centers in Western Ukraine, including Kiev, but also Odessa and other ones, to show that Ukraine is not going to fall under the Russian pressure. This is really important.
And what of Vladimir Putin and his position, or the security of his position in the Kremlin? I mean, barely a week goes past without another report of some senior figure within the Russian administration, perhaps a military advisor, perhaps a civil servant, finding themselves, suffering from a poison attack, going missing, having an unexplained heart attack.
Well, I think this is a pattern we are familiar with, sadly. And I would not read too much into it in terms of, oh, this is the weakening of the Putin's campaign in Ukraine. I think he will be willing to throw everything he has to somehow prevail enough so that he can claim victory. What victory looks like or success looks like for him can change. And like, for example, now he has clearly abandoned the aim of getting Kiev, overtaking Kiev, and now the focus is much more on the eastern Ukraine. But what victory and success looks like is going to be very important to make that war possibly coming to an end in a way that does not destroy the entire Ukraine and does not disseminate its population.
Fabrice, always good to see you. Fabrice Potier,
thank you
thanks
very
so much for joining us. Now, some of the day's other news now, and campaigners are calling for routine screenings in pregnancy of a common infection in adults, which can prove fatal in newborns. 2 babies, on average, develop Group B strep infection in the UK every day. One of those sick babies will die every week, with another survivor left with long-term disabilities. The government says there is currently insufficient evidence about the benefits of universal screening, but will keep it under review. One of the terrorists behind the 2015 Paris attacks has apologised to his victims in court. Salah Abdeslam told the court he'd changed his mind before detonating his suicide belt and said he wanted to express his condolences and offer an apology to all the victims. Abdeslam is the only surviving member of an IS cell which killed 130 people, including 90 at the Bataclan theatre. New research says thousands of cancer patients in England face distressing waiting times due to missed targets after the coronavirus pandemic. According to research from the House of Commons Library, 78% of patients between November and February waited longer than 2 weeks to see a consultant after an urgent referral from their GP. That means nearly 200,000 people waited longer than the targeted duration. Palestinian officials say that more than 150 people have been injured in clashes with police at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Joining us now, our Middle East correspondent, Alastair Bunkel from Jerusalem. Good to see you this morning, Alastair. Of course, we were talking around about the same time about the events in and around the Al-Aqsa Mosque. How has it been since then?
Well, it has been a lot quieter, thankfully, since then. We were watching out for potential violence last night, potentially around the Damascus Gate on the edge of the old city where Palestinians like to gather during Ramadan for iftar to break the Ramadan feast. It's been, particularly last year, it was the scene of a lot of trouble between Palestinians and Israeli police, but all quiet last night after the events of yesterday morning. No less tense, though, I should say. There's a lot of diplomacy, I think, going on behind the scenes. The Egyptians were reportedly speaking to Hamas, the group that controls Gaza, and could be quite influential in what happens next. And the Egyptians were also speaking to the Israelis as well, clearly relaying messages between them. Hamas reportedly have put down a number of demands. They've said that they want everybody who was arrested yesterday to be released. They want Muslims to be able to worship in peace in the Al-Aqsa compound. Both of those, I think, are possible. But they've also asked that the Israeli Defense Forces cease their operations around the West Bank town of Jenin. I don't think that is likely. I think they've got unfinished business there. So we'll see what happens on that front. And the US State Department as well, clearly showing the concern within the upper echelons of the American political system, saying that they want peace as well in Jerusalem.
Alastair, thank you. The United Nations Refugee Agency has raised concerns about the UK's proposal to send some migrants who arrive in Britain on small boats to Rwanda, the UN saying it's a breach of international law. Sky News understands the Home Secretary was forced to issue a ministerial direction over the scheme. That's a formal instruction for it to go ahead, despite objections from her most senior civil servant. Our political correspondent Rob Powell has the detail.
What this means is that the top civil servant in the Home Office, so a non-political official, has flagged up concerns as they see it about the plan to resettle people in Rwanda. Now, we don't have the precise details of what those concerns are, but they're usually about value for money or feasibility, or whether they just don't have enough data to conclusively say whether the plan will work or not. In response to that, Priti Patel has basically issued an instruction to say that officials should basically go ahead and implement the policy anyway. That means she's accountable for it. Now, you don't get many of these ministerial directions. There's only been about 46 in the last decade. They were issued quite a bit during the pandemic for things like the bounce back loan scheme, where there was a risk of fraud but a need to get money out quickly, and also Eat Out to help out. And what sources in the Home Office say specifically about the Rwanda resettlement policy is the reason that this has had to happen is just because it's quite a new, novel policy, and it's very hard to quantify the impact it will have, and hence put a number on how much money it could potentially save. Crucially, these directions don't mean that civil servants are against the policy, but it does show that there are concerns even within the department, and it also shows that there's a large degree of uncertainty about whether this will actually work. Now, for critics of the Rwanda plan, I think they will see this as further evidence, as they see it anyway, of a flimsy plan that could cost lots of money. But I think for those that are more sympathetic to the idea, they will see it as a case really of advisers advise and ministers decide, and probably praise the Home Secretary for pushing through with something that she believes can deliver results.
Rob Powell there. Time for us to have a quick look at your weekend weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
More fine, warm and sunny weather to come this Easter weekend. However, it will turn cooler with some rain by Monday. Most places will enjoy a dry start today with overnight low cloud, mist and fog patches, especially towards Wales and southwest England. The low cloud and fog will lift and clear to warm, sunny spells, although parts of Scotland might just stay fairly cloudy. Temperatures reaching into the low 20s in parts of England and Wales, but it is worth noting the pollen levels are going to be pretty high today. Thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain will spread across Western Ireland this afternoon, reaching northwest Scotland later. Ireland, Northern Ireland and Western Scotland will be cloudy and wet overnight. Elsewhere, it should stay dry with clear spells and some fog patches. For much of Britain, Easter Sunday looking to be fine with some increasingly hazy sunshine. However, Western Scotland, Northern Ireland and the Republic will be cooler, cloudier and wetter. And it turns cooler on Monday as that cold front sweeps southeastwards across the country, bringing some rain. A month after the UK's Ukraine sponsorship scheme was launched, thousands of sponsors are still waiting to welcome Ukrainian refugees to their homes. Tens of thousands of applications have been received by Ukrainian families, but so far, only a fraction have arrived in the UK. The Refugee Council says it shows a visa system is not fit for purpose, as Sky's Sadia Chowdhury reports.
Inundated with donations, Lynette is ready to host a Ukrainian family. But nearly a month after signing up, she's frustrated at what she says are hoops and hurdles in the sponsorship scheme.
You veer between total anger and wanting to scream at somebody to being on the verge of tears.
Getting the home up to council safety standards has been gruelling. She's been asked to drain her garden pond, add restrictors to windows and board over glass panelled doors.
Hi! Inna! How are you?
Not being able to track the application has made the wait worse.
You can order some balloons from China and you can track it and you know where it's coming from, you know where it is and you can generally tell when it will be delivered. You cannot track these visa applications. There's no way that the family can track them. You just have to wait.
More than 55,000 applications have been submitted to sponsor Ukrainian nationals. Fewer than half have been issued with visas, and just 6% of the refugees have arrived to the UK.
Frankly, it indicates that a visa system is not fit for purpose in responding to a humanitarian crisis, because what it does is it builds in delay, it builds in bureaucracy, and it builds in more human suffering.
For Vanessa, the process to get Yana and her daughter Ira here took 3 weeks. And with the conflict still raging, there is some joy.
I cried at the airport. Yeah, it's lovely. It's really lovely to know that they're both safe and they're living here and they're in our house and we can do this good thing.
The Refugees Minister has promised to simplify the visa process and says the UK is on track to processing cases in 48 hours. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News.
The mother of a British man captured by Russian forces in Ukraine has told Sky News he should be treated as a legitimate prisoner of war. Aidan Aslan was serving as a Marine in the Ukrainian armed forces when they were forced to surrender in the besieged city of Mariupol. His captors have since released photographs of him appearing to have suffered head injuries. Sky News has chosen not to show those images in line with the Geneva Convention, which says that prisoners of war ought to be protected and humanely treated. But this report by Fraser Maud does include a previous interview we did with Aidan whilst he was fighting on the front line.
Just hours before surrendering to Russian forces in the besieged city of Mariupol, Aidan Aslan sent this message home to his family in Newark.
If you're watching this, it means that we've surrendered. We lasted about a month, ran out of ammunition, food. The only thing we had left was water.
The next time the family of the former care worker saw him was on a video broadcast by Russian state TV, which claims he's a mercenary. A video which Sky News has chosen not to broadcast.
They have put him on their TV, so he is now, he is alive, but they are now accountable.
His family say Aidan, who has applied for Ukrainian citizenship, joined the Ukrainian army 4 years ago, and as such should be treated as a legitimate prisoner of war.
He's not a mercenary, he's not a volunteer, he did not go out there in the last month to think, I'm going to fight, I'm going to get glory. He has been out there for 4 years, and he is a legit Ukrainian Marine.
Aidan spoke to Sky's Stuart Ramsey shortly before his unit became entrenched in Mariupol. He wanted the world to listen.
I don't think we need to send British troops or American troops. I think all the West needs to do is we need to support Ukraine politically, like give them as much political support as we're doing, like continue it, even like amp it up, and just give them the weapons they need to defend themselves and to defend their country.
Aidan's family have contacted the Foreign Office for help to secure his release and hope that he could be part of a prisoner exchange between Ukraine and Russia. Whatever route he takes, they just want him to be able to return safely to the hero's welcome they believe he deserves. Fraser Maud, Sky News, Newark.
Well, let's get the latest on the ground from the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, now, and speak to Sviatoslav Jurash, a Ukrainian MP, in fact, Ukraine's youngest MP, I'm told. Sviatoslav, thank you so much for joining us this morning. First and foremost, I'm just wondering what the situation is like in and around Kiev at the moment. We've been hearing reports of explosions on the outskirts. Vitaly Klitschko is suggesting that medics are on the ground. Do you know any more about what has been happening over the past few hours?
Kiev continued to receive rocket attacks by cruise missiles from Russia, even though we defeated the Russians around Kiev and pushed them back across the border. But the truth is that as far as Kiev is concerned, we always have a threat of Russians coming back and trying to seize our capital. But we are well and ready. From the first days of the war, we turned Kiev into a citadel that is able to withstand all, as we've shown in the fighting over the last month in Kiev and around Kiev.
Do you then feel that the capital is impenetrable, is impregnable by the Russian forces? They do possess the ability, of course, to attack from a long range, which is what we assume has happened on the outskirts.
They attack from the long range. They attack from aircraft. They have been firing rockets non-stop, even though they were pushed back across the border and they were defeated around Kiev. But as far as the situation and what we expect, Russians have shown that they are willing to use anything and everything to try and subjugate our country. And again, we shall resist, no matter whether it's Kiev or Kharkiv or anywhere else in Ukraine.
What have you yourself been doing? I mean, our viewers will not know this, but I understand that you've been certainly very active on social media. You've certainly been trying to rally your fellow Ukrainians behind you, but you've also been receiving, as other men of kind of under 60 have been doing in Ukraine, receiving your military training.
I have been mobilized. I have become part of 133rd Battalion, and basically that this was around fighting around Kiev, and now awaiting orders from my commander to move further east. In the meantime, I try to maintain logistical operations to try and receive our humanitarian support that I'm sending out to the towns in need, and we are preparing a humanitarian mission to the east at the moment. At the same time, we're also trying to help the press, and I have some people who are involved with Foreign Legion.
Just in terms of the assistance that your country has been receiving, of course, it was only a couple of days ago that Boris Johnson made that surprise trip to the capital, and Volodymyr Zelenskyy certainly spoke very warmly about the assistance that the UK and others have been providing. But I suspect that there is no end to the requests that Ukrainians will have for heavier weaponry, additional armoured vehicles and so on.
It's also the matter of the UK leading the way as far as Western support and Western understanding, or the fact that Ukraine is a test case for international law working or not. So the point here is that UK taking this leading position is continuing in the proud tradition that the United Kingdom has always had in trying to lead the world to a just outcome, no matter the travails on the way. But as far as the requests we have, yes, the truth is the Russians are preparing something massive in the east, and they are trying to do that to showcase that this all was not a failure, and they will have at least some victory to present. We are determined to push them back and to fight till the very end, no matter which part of Ukraine this is, the capital or the east. So yes, nothing is enough, all is welcome.
I think that there are certainly those of us in the West who have been hugely impressed by the fortitude, by the strength shown by the Ukrainian people. We have also been utterly shocked by the scenes of devastation that we've seen in places like Mariupol. I mean, when this conflict comes to an end, as it must at some point, how much of your country do you think will be left?
The truth is that we don't see this scope of what's happening in Mariupol. Yeah. Mariupol was a town of 500,000 people, and last journalists that were there were thrown out, or actually there were several that were killed in Mariupol itself. So the horrors of Bucha and horrors of the territories we liberated around Kiev is just the beginning, because what you will see as we liberate more and more of our country is horror that Russia is imposing on everyone living here. But the fact of the matter is that this conflict will take as much as Russia is willing to throw at us, because again, for us, there is no question here. We're fighting for our very existence and for our future as an independent country, as an independent nation. So it doesn't matter what Russia throws at us. We must fight, we must resist.
Sviatoslav Jurash, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
With us once again to review the papers, the former editor of the Daily Star, Dawn Neesom, and the writer and academic, Mo Lovatt. Ladies, good to have you on again. We're pushed for time, so Mo, let's jump straight on into it. Your story from The Sun, words we do not want to hear from the Russians, that they already view this as World War III.
Yes, I mean, obviously, none of us want World War III. I think this is an interesting story. This comes about because of the sinking of the flagship ship in the Black Sea that Russia have now, or certainly a host of media channel, Russia One, which is backed by the Kremlin, of course, we know that, have described this as an escalation into World War III and say they are now fighting NATO infrastructure. That is not necessarily fact, as we know. There's a lot of propaganda coming out of both sides, but particularly in terms of the Russian side. But it's interesting that they've gone from calling this a strategic military operation in Ukraine to suddenly upping the ante. I mean, it is, let's face it, a major embarrassment for the Kremlin that this ship has been sunk. There's been a devastating loss of lives as well, of course. But the very fact that this ship was sunk, I mean, it's the first time, I think, since the Japan War of 1905 that such a catastrophic disaster has hit the Russian Navy. But obviously, serious embarrassment for the Kremlin. And the point of this ship is that it was there to protect other ships. It was kind kind of the lead ship within the Black Sea operation. So it is a major embarrassment. So this is probably why they've come out with this kind of fighting talk. But obviously, as you say, Neil, none of us want an escalation in the language or indeed the material reality on the ground. So yes, another turning point in the war, I think. Let's hope. I mean, there's already been one retaliation, I think, from Russia in bombing a missile factory just outside Kiev as a result of, as in kind of retaliation for this sinking. But it's very worrying when we hear this sort of language coming out of Kremlin-sponsored TV stations.
Yeah, and it'll also be interesting to see how the Kremlin responds to that. I think it's the story in the Times this morning about special forces being involved on the ground as well. But Dawn, can you take us to the front of the Daily Mail? And they seem to be getting quite annoyed about this, that civil servants, you know, the staff up and down Whitehall have adopted a hybrid working model. I thought that was what we were supposed to all be aiming for these days.
Well, I think we're all a bit confused. And firstly, it does feel weird that I'm not with you in the studio, Neil, but I do understand the restraining order. However, this is a Daily Mail exclusive investigation. They have got the Nixon twist about this one, but just 2 days a week in the office for civil servants. Thousands of mandarins, I mean, who uses that word in your life? But thousands of mandarins are now allowed to work from home. A Mail audit of a typical Monday in March found many public-funded bodies had less than 10% of their staff in work. Some only 5%, and one none at all. Now, when you consider how hard some departments, in particular the doctors and nurses working for the Department of Health on the front line, are working, it's a bit much that some people are still actually working from home, and they're getting allowances to work from home as well. They get loans to buy desks and things like that. Now, look, there are enormous benefits to working in office, especially if you're a younger employee, and also it supports satellite businesses like sandwich shops and the hospitality industry in cities as well. And it's all very well if you're a higher up civil servant, but if you're a youngster starting out, Neil, and you're living in cramped accommodation, working from home just can't be surely a good thing. And surely it's all time to get back to work.
Yeah, I think there were plenty of people agreeing with you this morning. Mo, take us, though, inside the Daily Mail. Interesting kind of marginal by-election coming up in Wakefield, and an interesting name doing the rounds as a potential Conservative candidate. Oh, in fact, he'd have to change his name from Lord Frost back to David Frost in order to stand.
Yeah, I think this is really juicy bit of gossip, Neil. Page 10 of the Mail. Tories are urging Lord Frost to stand in the Wakefield by-election. And as you say, he can actually, because of a change in the rules in 2014, he could actually come out of the Lords in order to stand. And I think the idea is that he's very popular, particularly with Brexit voters and the Tories in general. He's very statesmanlike. He's a professional man. He's a serious man, whether you agree with his politics or not. He's certainly seen as a very serious politician. So, and this is what the Tories think they need in the Wakefield by-election. Let's remember this is one of these red wall Tory seats that turned from Labour, a long-term Labour seat, up until 2019 when the Tories took it from Labour. I mean, I suspect, I think it's an interesting piece of gossip, and I'd really like to see David Frost return to frontline politics. I think it's probably a bit of a risky bet for him because it's not necessarily clear that the Tories are particularly high in the polls at the moment in this stage of the election cycle. So it could be a risk too much for Lord Frost, and he may play it safe and stay in the Lords. Why wouldn't he, I guess? But it's certainly an interesting bit of gossip, and I do think it's one to watch this space and see if Lord Frost is tempted by a return to the Commons.
I suspect we will soon find out. Dawn, you've got 30 seconds to tell us why 2/3 of Britons want the Prime Minister to resign if...
How many parties are too many parties? That's the big question on our minds at the moment. 55% of Brits, 2/3 of Britons actually want Boris Johnson out if he gets any more party fines. Obviously, he's already been fined 50 quid for being ambushed by a birthday cake, if I remember rightly, along with Rishi and the missus. I have a name, probably forgot. So, in any case, they've already had one fine, but we think that if he gets fined more, then he should be out and he should resign. And interestingly, 55% of us also think that Rishi should resign. And Rishi, I thought he'd more or less got away with the one party. And only 14% of us, Neil, think that Boris is telling the truth about he didn't know what a party was.
Still, 1 in 4 think he should remain in role even if he does get more fines, which is another way of putting the headline on the story. Dawn, Mo, we will be back for round 3 just before 9 o'clock. We will see you then. But you can stay right where you are. We will have more from Ukraine. In the past few minutes, we've been hearing from the mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, suggesting that there has been an explosion on the outskirts of the capital, the southeastern district of Kiev on the left bank of Dnipro. We will have more of that after this.